my husband and I typically will go away for like a week or so around my birthday. It's late August. It's, a great time to kind of get away at the end of summer. And we spent a couple of days in the woods in Big Sur, and we spent a couple of days in different cities along the coast. And this strange thing was happening in every city that we were in. My husband and I, his name is Nathan, we would be sitting at a restaurant or sitting at a bar having a drink, and there would be a small group of men sitting together talking about business, but not just business, money and their successes. And, there were several celebrations, and it was like everyone else in the room was quiet and I can just hear their conversation, and I was enthralled. And after hearing like three or four of these conversations throughout the week in different cities, I came back to you, Chelsea, and I was like, I've really been thinking a lot about this, and that these men were talking about business and money and their success in ways that I never talk to women about those same things. And I was like, why? Why is that the case? And, you know, I talk on social media and stuff about how I get together with usually women on Friday mornings, and we have coffee. Some of these women I meet with on a regular basis, some I'm meeting for the first time. I try to get out maybe every other month to have coffee with some, founders in the city. And we talk about business, but we talk about how are we feeling about business, and we talk about, what we're doing, but we don't get into specifics. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know the last time someone said to me, "Hey, Sarah, I am so proud of myself," or "I'm so excited and I want to celebrate with you. I just made X thousands of dollars," or "I
Mm-hmm.
just closed a deal and put a value on it." There was just something that struck me about the specificity that these guys were talking about business. And it wasn't all wins, wins, wins. It was the gamut. Hard times,
Yeah.
good times, all of it. But it was so specific. And that's
And
what really stood out.
the thing that really struck me too about, when you were telling me about this, that you had witnessed this, right, was you very clearly said like it didn't seem showy or
No.
like there was no ego around it. It was just transparent conversation around business and around money.
Yeah, and the other thing I think too was like, in particular, I'm thinking of this one really small wine bar that we were sitting in, and there were three guys, and they were sharing a bottle of white wine. And one of the men was celebrating the sale of something that he had worked on for years. He had invested time, he had invested money. The other men who were there knew, how much time and energy and effort he had invested. And he was celebrating the amount of money that he was going to earn from this sale. And they were all genuinely proud of him. And they weren't just talking about the money, they were recognizing his work, they were recognizing the time, and they were celebrating what he could do with that money.
Mm-hmm.
It was, it's so weird to say, but it was like beautiful. It wasn't broy, as I think some people would stereotypically think that it was. And it definitely got me thinking like that could be a group of women sitting over there talking about that, but it's not. And I don't hear, and I'm not part of those kinds of transparent
Yeah.
conversations.
So, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is why or why not, right?
Yeah.
What do you think it is that holds us back from having those kinds of conversations?
I think that that is such a complicated question to answer, but
Loaded.
so yeah, so loaded. But I think, I am not a doctor. I don't study humans, right? I do happen to be a woman though. And I think that, myself and other women that I know, like it's not good to talk about money in general, like period, good, bad, or otherwise. I know friends that like don't share how much they pay in rent, or they don't share what their mortgage is. I don't know how much savings or lack of savings they have in their bank account. Like, we don't know anything about each other's like financial world. And I think it's just generally an uncomfortable topic to talk about. I also think though that, except in certain places, like I've been a part of like coaching groups where we are talking about money because that's the work to be done. But even then, it's not always explicit. Like, it's a big celebration of money, but it's not talked about if like you lost money or if like you didn't hit a goal, right? So
Mm,
it's sort of one-sided conversation in that kind of space. But I think it can be hard for women to talk about the good and to talk about the bad. And there's this article that I read for back in 2018, an author by the name of Jessica Knoll, who is pretty famous at this point. She's written a number of number one bestsellers. She's, written movies that have been number one on Netflix. But she wrote an article called "I Want to Be Rich and I'm Not Sorry." And I remember when I read that back in 2018, I was like, that's the attitude that I want to have in life. And that's the attitude that I want other women to have too. And in that article, and maybe we can link to it in the show notes, but she talks about, the differences between men and women, and how in her world there was an author, a male author, who was like, my book sold into, 27 countries. And I think that that's like I've broken a record. And she was like, I knew that he didn't break a record because mine sold into 28. But I couldn't say that because that would be bragging, or that would be mean, or that would be rude. Right. And she like
mm-hmm.
hoped that someone else would say it on her
On her,
behalf,
yeah.
you know? And so I think it's a lot of how we're brought up. But then on the flip side, I think, you know, we don't want to make people feel bad. We also don't want to feel bad, right? Like, what if we share something and someone's like, oh, well, I make more than that, or whatever. And then there's this sort of comparison that can happen, that feels bad.
And so that's the thing that really was so interesting to me about this conversation, because I think that that's a prevalent fear for people, right? That if I share the details about the things I'm proud of, what if everyone else is like, so
Yeah.
big deal, or this, or I've done that. And we do get in our heads about comparing ourselves to everyone else, right? All of our peers, people that are in the same line of work as us. And if no one is sharing the
Mm-hmm.
details, right? Then of course we get in our heads in the comparison, because then all we have to go on is really that outward look, right? What does
Yeah.
it look like on social media? What does their business look like on the internet or in their podcast? And we don't know the truth,
Mm-hmm.
right? I not necessarily about money, but another example of this was really recently. I learned on social media about another podcast that is in a similar space as us that was celebrating, I think it was like 25,000 downloads. And in that celebration, there was like 30 or 40 people on the post that were like, wow, that's so amazing. Congratulations. I can't believe it. You're doing such a great job. Right. And I was reading all of this and I was like, oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
We have more downloads than that. And I didn't think that we were doing as well as this podcast,
Yeah.
right? In
Yeah.
particular. And so that, not to say like, oh, and we're better, but it's that same fear of comparing yourself to others without really knowing the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And you're
Yeah.
always going to kind of imagine that you're lowest on the totem pole, right?
Well, I think there's a lot in that and in what you're saying. One is like this idea that I was having, or this thought I was having the other day, is like, what if we were proud of our accomplishments, just regardless of how they compared to anyone else's, right? Like, what was it for you and I that when we were looking at our podcast stats, we weren't simply proud of what we were doing?
Yeah,
Why was the mental approach to be, it should be more, or
that's
this
not
should
enough.
be better? Exactly.
Yeah.
There was a built-in assumption that we had that was incorrect to a certain extent, right? And since then, or maybe you've looked at different types of statistics and you're able to kind of compare us to some industry benchmarks, and we've learned more about things that we're doing well, the percentage of the episode that people listen to, the number of times it's downloaded within 7 to
30
30 days
days.
of release.
Yeah.
It's like these are all really exciting things, and there is both this, like, I think, benefit to knowing how you're doing, right? But also at the same time, I want us and I want founders to be proud of what we've accomplished without having to compare ourselves to others. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like an interesting catch 22, right? And when we're talking about this in celebration and in this conversation, about these gentlemen that I kept hearing having these conversations, it's like, you know, I want that. I sort of want it all for everyone. I want us to be, if we are proud of ourselves, to say we have, 28,000 downloads in, I don't remember the number of episodes. And you know what I mean? And we've earned this much in revenue, or we've had our highest revenue month ever. And that might be someone else's lowest revenue month of the year, but that doesn't matter, because for us, it is a win. For us, it is progress. And one of the things, I guess it's like sort of in line with this, that we talk a lot about in both of the businesses, Sarah Delavan Consulting and the Good Food CFO, is that we're running our own race.
Yeah.
And I want to bring it back to, your story, like from Starbucks, right? Is like, you made a very difficult decision. You took 6 months off. And some people would look at that in one way and say, I'm so proud of her for doing that. I could, see that you were working like crazy and that you were just worn out by the time
Yeah.
you got through 2 years of COVID. And other people might say, man, she's lazy, or how is she going to afford that? Or who knows what negative thing that they were going to say. Right. But you are like, this is my life. This is my body. This is my health. This is my money. And I'm running my own race. And
Yeah.
this is what I need. And I am proud of myself for resting. Right. So
And
it's like,
even that was hard, right?
mm-hmm.
Like, and when we go back to that comparison thing, right? Is I think it's really hard to not compare yourself.
Yeah.
That in its own way is a practice.
Yeah.
Even in the decision to, as you said, run my own race, there was a lot of time where I would sit around going, oh, I'm not doing enough. I'm not producing. I'm being lazy, as you
Mm-hmm.
said. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, no, I wasn't. I was resting my body
Recovering,
and
really.
recovering.
Yeah.
Exactly. And look where it led me.
Yeah. And so I think, like, to answer that very loaded question that you asked, I don't know how many minutes ago now, but all of these things I think keep us from sharing, right? We don't want to be braggy if we have done well. It's difficult to feel proud of ourselves if we're concerned that the person we're sharing it with is going to think it's a silly win, or like not that big or small in comparison to theirs. You know what I mean? And I think those types of fears, they keep us quiet.